Hello and welcome to Kukubo Crafts. Today is going to be a how-to video on foundation paper piecing. I'm going to go through all of the steps it takes to make a paper pieced quilt block using a pattern from Kukubo Crafts or any other foundation paper piecing designer out there. Let's get into it. Okay, the materials you need for foundation paper piecing are pretty simple. First, you're going to need the actual paper piecing templates. These are the ones that just have lines and letters and numbers. These are included in your pattern. And then there's also the cutting templates, which are individual pieces with the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and they have a color indicator and alignment indicator for directional fabrics. Then, past that, you're going to want some kind of rotary cutting mat and cutting blade. Yours might look different. I suspect it'll look a little bit more like these ones. Then you have a choice between two different things, either a washable glue stick. I love Elmer's Disappearing Purple. You can see it and it's available almost everywhere. Or you use straight pins. I prefer the glue. This tutorial is going to be showing it with glue, but I will mention where you can use pins instead. Then for ease of sewing, a add a 1/4 ruler like this is extremely useful for trimming up your paper piecing as you go. They come in two sizes. There are the small ones like these, and then also a larger one. For this project, it's pretty small, so I'm going to be using the smaller ruler. This is not necessarily a requirement. You can do this with regular quilting rulers. This just has a wonderful lip here that makes foundation paper piecing, trimming the seams super easy. Then one of my favorite tools in all of quilting are the clips. Name brand would be Wonder Clip, but there are hundreds of different manufacturers of these on Amazon, which I prefer. I'll have a link in the description for the ones I'm using. That's all the materials you're going to need. So let's get started with the cutting. The first step in foundation paper piecing is, of course, cutting your templates. We are going to start here with the cutting templates. Each one of these is printed right side up. So solid, obviously it doesn't matter. But you'll place your piece on to the fabric and you can very quickly just cut around. These do not need to be precision cut. Something like this is perfectly fine. You're going to be trimming as you go, so that's all that needs to be done. Grab another piece for the larger red. Do this for every piece and every color. That way you have your stacks ready to go when you start the paper piecing process. Once you get skilled at paper piecing, you don't need to use cutting templates anymore. You can just use the shape on your paper piecing template, but I suggest if you are just beginning to learn how to paper piece, use the cutting templates. Specifically because they have the color indicator on them. They're a lot easier to remember, but you could also take a little pen and color code these if you wanted to. Some fabrics are directional, like this piece here, and that is where the alignment markers on your cutting templates come into play. This points towards the top of your pattern, so you can orient them onto your fabric. In this case, I am creating a wood stock, so I'd actually prefer that this pattern follows the stock. That way, this one will go with it at that direction, and then the other little piece of the stem I will orient this way. And again, really rough cut, really rough cut. And then I will stack these to the side with the red ones. For the green, there's a single little piece. For this project, I'm using completely scrap materials. And then the background is the final color. And again, you just lay out the pieces as well as you can. If you're concerned about wasted fabric, yes, you can put these in better, but I don't care about pattern matching for this, and I don't care about wasted material. I do have more of this fabric if I happen to run out of room. As you can see, I'm just laying them all out like so. It does look like I'm gonna have to grab that other piece of fabric, but that is totally okay. I will cut these apart. All right, now we have all of our pieces cut out. I leave them in a pile with all of their cutting templates, so I remember each piece that I have cut the piece for. This pattern specifically has 3 different letters, and these are the main chunks you're working with. Some patterns are going to have more. If you're really lucky, you'll find a pattern that is a single piece, but to get the shape I wanted for this one, it was in 3 different ones. So first I'm going to sort all of the pieces that go with each of these chunks. And then from here, I'm going to grab my first chunk, which I'm going to start with A. You can do these in any order. It'll depend later on what you sew together, but you can make all of the blocks in whatever order you want. So now I'm going to get them in numeric order. All right, now that I have these in numeric order, this is where we switch to the sewing machine. Now that we're at the sewing machine, that's where we're going to take the paper piecing template and start sewing onto it. A couple suggestions before we get started. Put your stitch length a little smaller, like 2, and use a larger needle. I'm using a quilting needle because I have tons of them, but if you have a normal piecing needle, that works great too. These suggestions will make it a little bit easier to pull off the paper in the end. And then from here, you're going to want to find the piece that you have that's labeled 1. That corresponds to this directional fabric here. And this is where it gets a little complicated. This is the back side of the final block. Where the printing is the back. So we will flip the paper over and lay this with the pretty side facing you over the top of the piece. You can use a light, kind of see it there, to make sure there is a 1/4 inch around the whole piece. Thankfully, this is a really tiny piece, and I cut a pretty large piece of fabric, so I don't really need to worry about that on this one. From here is where I grab the Elmer's glue, but you could also grab a pin. The reason I prefer glue is because pinning this little tiny piece to the paper is not going to be easy. So I just put a little dab of glue right there and stick the fabric piece on. Remember, this was directional, so I'm making sure it points up because I want the stem to have the direction of the fabric. From here, you are going to find A2, which is this little piece here. This time, just like normal sewing, it's right sides together. So you're going to look and see A2 is over on this side, and you just need to make sure that there is a 1/4 inch beyond this line that is between the 2 pieces. From there, we will put it into the sewing machine. I'm bringing you in for a close-up here to see where I positioned the needle. You can see I stuck it a little back from that line that we're going to sew, just because it is such a small seam. Having that little bit extra is very useful. From here, we just stitch down that line, create our first seam. And this is what the seam looks like after you stitched it out. I just followed along on that line right between A1 and A2. And then from the back side, it kind of looks crazy, but once you trim away these stitches here, and then this piece will open, and the goal is to make sure that it fully covers this piece with a 1/4 inch seam around it when it's folded open. Kind of see if I put a light behind it that this piece does indeed. If it doesn't, you're going to have to rip it off and take it off because you do need that 1/4 inch seam around. Placing the pieces gets a little complicated, and this is why I always cut with extra material, because it makes the job way less precise and you'll have an easier time making sure there's enough fabric around when you fold it open. Now, after each seam is where you are going to grab your add a 1/4 ruler or a normal quilting ruler, and right along the seam you are going to fold the paper over, stick down your ruler, and take your rotary blade right across the edge there. This is where the add a 1/4 ruler comes in handy, because you can see it just kind of gets itself stuck right here, so you have a perfect 1/4 inch seam. And that's when you then open up this fabric. I typically grab a little bit extra glue, stick it right there, and then I finger press it open. So that is your first seam. Continuing on to the next piece, we will find a 3, which is another teeny tiny piece on this pattern. And just like before, right sides together. We make sure that there is a 1/4 inch beyond this line right here. I know that's a straight line, so I should have plenty of extra right there. And then we go back to the sewing machine and repeat the process from the second one. And now we have 2 seams. From here I do the same trimming process, and then I will get back to the 4th. Now we have 3 pieces together. You can kind of see how the pattern's starting, and I will move on to this A4 piece here. Now I'm going to tell you right now, this is where things start to get a little more tricky. You can see this is a very long piece with an angle, and this will take a little bit of finagling to kind of figure out, okay, that should fold over, but then you realize, oh, my piece isn't quite lined up with that seam. And that's when you just wiggle things around. I typically fold a bit of the fabric in and place it on the line here as best as I can to make sure that I have that whole shape covered. Often it's not where you expect the piece to be. Kind of crazy, but that is the seam we are currently dealing with. And then I just, like before, put it down. And when I fold open, I'm going to test real fast before I do the trim that I have indeed gotten the fabric to fully cover that shape. And then I will come, fold the paper, stick down the ruler, and trim. And then I can fold over the piece and finger press down. From here, I'm going to do a little time lapse of me putting together the rest of this apple. All right, and now we have all of A sewn together. Every single line between shapes has a stitch, and this creates the very clean lines that you get on the correct side of your paper piecing. Obviously, a little crazy outside of this, and from here you can trim down the seams for all of these. And if you want to add a little extra glue, like on these edges, you can. But the next step is going to use the quilting clips, so you don't have to. If you have a pattern that is only one piece of paper, it is at this point that you would actually be done and you could remove all of the paper. This is not the only piece in this pattern. There are 2 more. So keep the paper on for now. That's really important for the next step. But I'm going to go ahead and put the other 2 pieces together and I'll be back with you. All right, we are back and all 3 pieces for this little apple have been stitched out. The paper is still on them, and this is when we sew them together, and this is just like regular piecing. For more complex patterns, the templates are going to have these alignment markers on them, and what you'll do with that is line them up just like you would a parallel sewing pattern. But in this case, and even with these ones, they are square. So these don't have the alignment markers, but you can kind of tell. You sew these 2 together, and then you sew this piece onto the larger piece. With very complex patterns, you'll find in your file set something called the sewing order, and that's going to be, it's going to look like a math problem, and it'll say, like for this one, it'll say C plus B, sew those 2 together, and then plus A. And you do it in that order. Obviously, you can't sew C to A without sewing B first. This is a very simple one, so it's a lot less complicated. But just like all other sewing, we will put right sides together. And this is where I grab some of the quilting clips. They're just so much better than pins. They're not going to warp the fabric or poke holes and cause shifting. So with those 2 sewed together, just like all the other seams, we're going to sew right down this line, and it's going to create a perfect 1/4 inch seam. And just like that, we have a seam on both sides, right along that line, and opening it up makes that corner beautiful. I can't get triangles to look this good in any way other than paper piecing. This is why I love this method of quilting. It's just very clean and sharp. Now let me sew the other piece on and I can show you the final product. And there you have it, a final paper piece. Now at this point it's really stiff, like this is a very hard seam to open because there's a lot of material right here. What is going to help with this, because you have your final block now, is ripping off all of the paper. This is why I suggested using the larger needle and smaller stitch. A small suggestion, if you want to keep it like perfectly straight, you can stitch around the outside of the square. That will help lock in these stitches as you're pulling off the paper. This is not required. Without doing that stitch, it'll just be however you sew it onto the other blocks you're using it with. Normally I get started from a corner and I just start peeling off. Putting your finger on top of stitch ends helps a lot to keep them from getting pulled out. And then when I reach an edge, you can kind of just pull and it just comes off right like that. Okay, now most of the paper is off at this point. There's a few smaller ones, and if you really want to get into the weeds, I should say, you can get these little paper bits off, kind of scratch them with your finger. They don't always come off, and that's not going to be the end of the world. The paper will soften up with washing, and it should be on the inside of your project anyways. So if you get it to this point, that's probably fine. Sometimes I like to go in and make it like super duper clean, but these little tiny ones right here, I'm probably not going to bother with, just because I'm more concerned about pulling out these stitches than I am about taking the paper completely off. But now I have a much easier to open seam without the paper in it, and after this I will just iron it down and add it to the project I'm doing, but completed foundation paper piecing. If you have any questions, if I missed something, if something wasn't clear, please leave a comment. I'm more than happy to make a part 2 going over anything I missed or wasn't clear on. Thank you for watching, and I hope this helped a lot.